if immigration is one of the top 3 things that people are going to vote for, if that's what's going to change your vote, you ain't voting for Labour or the Tories. You're voting for reform anyway.
And actually, at one point, I said to her, I seem to be making you very cross. You seem very irritated with me.
That was a textbook of how not to answer a question.
Hello and welcome to Electoral Dysfunction from Sky News with me, Beth Rigby.
Me, Ruth Davidson.
And me, Harriet Harman.
And we are coming at you from Brit Ian, which is apparently what Kemi Badenoch is calling the country that she wants to lead.
If you missed this at the Tory party conference this week, all the journalists were given these party bags, and in them was a custom chocolate bar signed by Kemi Badenoch, and it was meant to say, when Labour negotiates, Britain loses. But they misspelt Britain. I mean, that is so in the thick of it, isn't it? Can you imagine the press team when they realised?
Are we sure that it wasn't on purpose and there's some terribly clever subliminal message which we are not getting?
No.
I thought it must have been on purpose. It's such a weird and obvious mistake to make.
But think how many hands those chocolate bars went through in terms of like packaging them up, sending them on, taking them out the box, individually putting them in each of the bags, distributing the bags. Like, how did nobody notice?
But there's always confident gaffes, aren't they? Which is one of the great things about them.
But I tell you what, they're like gold dust. They were you couldn't get hold of one.
Collector's items.
Collector's items. I actually went into the press room to do a briefing because they give us a briefing before the speech, and I looked to the left and there were dozens of little party bags, the journalist party bags, and I wondered whether they were stuffed with these chocolate bars. And I sort of wish I'd nicked one now because I think I could have made a killing on eBay. Do you think?
I think you probably could, yeah.
I mean, I know that people make gaffes, but to misspell Britain as the Conservative and Unionist Party, Ruth, it's a disgrace, isn't it? To quote Liz Truss on cheese.
It's the sort of thing that you don't want on at the start when it's one of those make or break conferences when you're polling at 15% and have just lost the government. It's just like, if there was a visual metaphor, here it is. But to be fair, I thought she did well to get past it. And there have been, I mean, it's all relative, but there have been worse gaffes at conferences. Neil Kinnock falling into the waves with Glenys, I think, is still my favourite. Is that Blackpool?
Poor Neil, yeah.
Can you just take us through that, Harriet? Just recreate the scene.
I think he was filming something ahead of, a very important Labour Party conference, and he was on the beach at Blackpool walking along with his very lovely deceased wife, Glenys, and he fell over and the sort of waves engulfed him. But it was one of those things, the press are very cruel, Beth,
Very
I think
cruel.
you all agree, is that it's been played over and over again and still is to this day. But one of my favourites, aside from Theresa May dancing onto the conference stage to Dancing Queen, was when she was speaking and the letters on the billboard behind her all started dropping off. She was plunging in the polls.
Yeah, I was in the third row, and it's the
awful.
closest. It's the closest thing to PTSD I think I've ever had.
And you could hear them
genuinely,
clunk on the floor behind her. Oh,
right. I have broken 12 bones in my body. I've been run over by a truck. I've smashed up my back jumping through a window frame from the army, and I swear it's still the most traumatic thing that I've ever been a part of. And just watching it, because it wasn't that, it was her voice cracking all the way through.
She had laryngitis, didn't she? Could hardly speak.
To the point where Philip Hammond had to hand her a cough speech in the middle of her speech. Then there was the protester that got through.
Oh yeah, where they gave her a P60.
They handed her P45.
P45, yeah.
And he was trying to say, and Boris was there as well, and he was trying to say like, Boris is coming to take your job. And then the letters fell off, and it was honestly, I drove up the road. I think that was a Manchester conference as well, and I drove up the road, and I didn't know what happened. It was horrendous. It was honestly horrendous.
That was incredible, because here she was leading her party, but with plunging in the polls, and somebody in the audience got up and handed her, when she was at the podium, a piece of paper which turned out to be a P45, you're fired. I mean, how could that even have happened?
What I really love is the fact that nobody pays any attention to Scottish conferences, because I had a tremendous gaffe in my last one, like a proper doozy clanger, which was, so I did UK conference in the October, massively pregnant, and then went off on, that was basically the last thing I did before I went off on mat leave, because it was like a fortnight before Finn was due. And then I had 6 months of mat leave, and then came back, and the first big set piece I did the first week I was back was Scottish Conference, which, as it turns out, is quite a high wire act to do, to just, you know, have a baby and then the first thing you do is come back to a conference week, because you know, they're quite intense. And it turns out when I was doing my run through of my platform speech to close the conference the night before, at the end of it, this was in Aberdeen, when I go through a speech and stuff, I editorialise at the time, go, all right, we'll take that line out, we'll move that there, I'm not saying that, this is fucking shite, let's make this better, blah, blah, blah. And it turns out the feed from the microphone was being piped into the press room to all the journalists, yeah. And there had been large...
Hot mic. She's been hot mic'd.
Completely hot mic'd. I almost always write my conference speeches myself. Like, there are other people that do sections of them and stuff. I'd had more help with this one than usually because I had a child that did not sleep. And it was also because we were about to head into the snap election in 2019, and it was obvious it was coming. There was a lot of Brexity stuff. I was very pro staying out of Brexit. Boris had just become Prime Minister and was very pro being into Brexit, and we were going to be the party of Brexit, and we had a section written about how this was going to be. And luckily, somebody managed to switch the feed off, because I still didn't know this was happening, just before I started ripping to absolute shreds what had been written on this Brexit section, going, I'm not effing saying that, and we can get rid of that, and there is no way that, like, frankly, I don't believe in this, so I will not say it. I was getting right on my hoity-toity high horse.
Oh, so, my God.
Yeah, we had to make it.
There's got to be a whole podcast that we could do on the dangers of doing things immediately you come back from mat leave, or even pat leave. Do you remember when Tony Blair went to speak to the Women's Institute shortly after coming back off paternity leave?
From Leo being born.
Child, and he got a slow hand clap, because you kind of are out of the zone. When you come back in, it takes a while to whole new pod we need on that.
Well, like, all the chat going into Tory Party conference, this conference, not Theresa May's conference of doom, was how long does Kemi have left? So today we can get into whether her big speech and the announcements on stamp duty and all the other policy waterfalls that happened have saved her leadership, and if so, for how long, or whether anybody out there is actually even listening to the Tories at the moment. And Beth, you can tell us how your interview with her went down as well, and whether she's the same off camera, or at least off stage, as she was behind the podium.
Yeah, I was. We will get into that in a minute. It's only the second time I've ever interviewed her, which, given she's been in post for a year, and she's the leader of the opposition, and I'm a political editor for a big broadcaster, that's a little bit surprising, because you would think that she would want to get on the airwaves much more, and I think it speaks to her dislike of the media and also her aloofness. But we'll get into it. It's a very tense interview. Let's get straight to it. And the Conservatives, in less than 3 weeks' time, it'll be November the 3rd. And that date was swirling around Manchester all week until Kemi Badenoch's speech. Ruth, why? It's not Guy Fawkes night. What's so big about November the 3rd?
So the 3rd of November, not the 5th, is important because the Conservative Party rules state that you can't depose a leader, you can't challenge a leader for until a year after they've been in post. And you've got to have 30% of the parliamentary party to write letters to the 1922 committee. Now, our parliamentary party is so small that now means 36 MPs. And there was some chatter online that there was a WhatsApp group of MPs that were scheming to get rid of her. But in terms of how she comes out of this, Beth, I think she came out of conference in a much more secure position than she went in, I have to say. In the same way that Keir Starmer did, actually. But yeah, I thought the challenge that she was looking to be under, she's kind of put to bed for a bit.
And Ruth, remind us, how long did you give Kemi Badenoch? And has that now changed?
I gave her 2 years, and I think I modified it to 18 months, so that would be to next summer. And the jury's still out, actually. I thought she did a great speech. I can tell you what I really liked about it. I thought it was a side of her we'd not seen. It was natural. It was well communicated. She ticked lots of the boxes she needed to tick. And I think she looked and sounded better than any of her potential challengers. So, Robert Jenrick, a bit like Andy Burnham, but less overtly. Robert Jenrick's been the one that's been doing all of the running. He was given a good slot. He was given enough room to to show off himself and what an alternate leadership might look like. And actually conference, and I think probably people at home and members of the party at home, did not think that was an upgrade on what we have right now. So I thought she surprised people on the upside on her speech by quite a long way, actually.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was up there for the entire time, and every single conversation you have with anyone is Kemi Badenoch going to be your leader come the end of the year? Is Kemi Badenoch going to become is still your leader after the May England council elections, the Senate elections in Wales, and of course the Holyrood elections in Scotland? And I still think that the second one is a very live question, the first one less live, i.e. I think you're right, Ruth. She surprised on the upside in the speech. She upped the tempo, if you like. She's been a very low energy leader for the past 12 months. Some of the MPs were muttering about it being a lost year, that she has been in power for nearly a year and she has just completely lost against Farage, who's stolen the march. The poll ratings for the Tories have dropped 9 percentage points since she became leader. So when she was anointed or won last November, they're on about 26, 27%. And they've gone backwards. They're now on 17%. The poll by YouGov this week put them on joint third with the Liberal Democrats. So all of the fundamentals have gone backwards, be that council seat losses, council losses, polling. Her approval ratings are lower than Ian Duncan Smith when he faced a leadership challenge when he was the opposition leader. I think what she did in that speech was she upped the tempo. So she went from low energy to upping the tempo. They got loads of policy ideas out. I think they realised that they were in the timeline of a fast news cycle and politics moving quickly, that they were asleep at the wheel, and they kind of woke up and kind of began to drive the car. So that
I thought they were smart as well in sort of addressing some of the criticisms about the lost year. Because there was a line in the speech that said, look, I'm an engineer, so what I want to do is spend time evaluating the problem first and then seek to solve it.
Yeah,
and that's why you've seen no policy for a year, and now we're just chucking policies at the wall. I mean, I think that was an excuse. I think it's retrospective. But it wasn't. It was quite a smart line.
Yeah, I mean, look, I disagree with that in the sense that I just don't think she has worked hard enough, been impactful enough, fought enough in terms of trying to get the Conservative brand back in the game. And it might be that, you could say, after the loss, you need a period of silence. But you cannot have a silence when Nigel Farage has got a megaphone running around the country and putting all your policy plans out first. So, on the immigration plans and on the climate plans, which Kemi Badenoch announced, Nigel Farage has already done it, I think that they were good on the economy, Ruth. I think that was pretty smart, trying to identify billions of pounds of spending cuts in order to fund their big tax cut announcement, which was stamp duty, and pitching themselves, in opposition to the Labour government. So, look, there was a lot of good stuff in it, but I would argue, I just don't think the fundamentals have changed. And I think there'll be a bit of a blip and there'll be a bit of woo policy and there'll be a bit of excitement. And then in a few weeks' time, they're going to be back where they were in terms of the leader's office and how they're viewed. And I think unless Kemi Badenoch seriously changes her approach from now going forward, it's not going to be good for her.
But I think, for somebody, two things really about the speech. The first is, for somebody who's notoriously grumpy and sometimes downright rude to people, she seemed to come across with an incredible warmth.
So
she looked
true.
as though she was enjoying it. She made a few jokes and then laughed at her own jokes because she was really enjoying it and they were really enjoying it. She seemed really relaxed. And I think in terms of a work of communication, it was really, really good and really well received. But I think the most important thing about it is that she's obviously made a big strategic decision about where they're going to place themselves in relation to reform. They are not going to out-reform reform. They are going to go on the economy, not just on immigration, and try and chase Farage down that point. So the speech seems like it's made a calculation that the Labour government is going to have very many difficulties on the economy, things are not going to go well, that people will be looking to a right of centre party who's
Yeah.
offering sound money. So
So
that is a really big strategic decision.
it's
She is not doing the generic thing. And she did a little kind of sort of faux generous remark at about generic and then swept past him. So she quite artfully
so
put him in his place. There's one final point, which is that I'm not sure you can get a hearing. All the evidence is from previous situations is you cannot get a hearing as a party who's been shoved out of government and defeated, thrashed at the polls. You can't get a hearing until you explain why it went so badly wrong. Was your ideology wrong? Did you have the right ideology but failed to deliver? Was it external events that knocked you off course? She hasn't explained the disaster that befell the country under the Tory government. And usually you can't get a hearing, but perhaps these days, politics is so different at the moment. Perhaps people will listen to her, even though she seems to have no explanation of what hash they made of it last time.
Ruth, the first thing on the strategy is that I think there's a view within the party or the leadership or the MPs that I spoke to that they cannot out Farage on immigration, but they can put forward a set of policies to kind of neutralise it, right? But where they can try and win back ground against Farage on the one side and his, quote, fantasy economics, and Labour on the other side and their, what the Conservatives would say, high tax, high debt economy, that they can kind of rebuild as a party of economic credibility. And I think that is sort of that they're going for like we're a serious, competent party. Now, one Conservative messaged me about that this morning. And this was from a pollster that had sent it to this very senior Conservative who sent it to me. And they said, the Conservatives this week, possible polling impact for the speech, in some ways it could be worse. We are doing Clegg 2015 with a serious party in the middle. It's a false distinctiveness and it actually gets crowded out because there's no edge to it.
I think that's where the gap in the market is. I think the gap in the market is for a right of centre, pro-business argument to be made. Because actually, for all the talk about growth from Labour, it's not really a pro-private business argument that they're running. They're still doing a lot of levers of state in terms of tax and spend, in terms of what they're concentrating on at the Treasury. And I've long said, as both Labour and the Conservatives are chasing Farage on immigration, that if immigration is one of the top three things that people are going to vote for, if that's what's going to change your vote, you ain't voting for Labour or the Tories. You're voting for reform anyway. So I thought what she did that was good was, if you saw the way the speech was structured, she did almost like two paragraphs at the top that were aimed at the public, which was a kind of a précis of what she was going to do. Like, we need a strong economy and strong borders because everything else flows from that. All the things you care about, the health service, education, services, investment, job creation. If you don't have the first two, you don't get any of them. So that was the kind of the premise of the speech. She then did all of the stuff where she had to tickle the party and thank, councillors and cabinet ministers and all the rest of it. And then she got into a policy section. So it was a really well structured speech. But this idea that she's offering something so it's not just borders, and also that slightly puts generic to the side because that's all he talks about. But I also think the strategy is right. The economy is where Tories can come together. So left wets like me can get on the same piece of land as somebody like, somebody that's much more right of centre.
I still think there's an issue of they want to be the party of economic credibility, but the Liz Truss mini budget still looms large from 2022, and that is a challenge. Yeah, of course it is. What's really interesting to me is the way in which, if I compare and contrast her with Jenrick, because I went in for his speech as well. I mean, he did actually quite a good speech, and there were some funny jokes in it, but he just, it just slightly, it's not entirely comfortable. It's like he's really trying and you can tell he's really trying, and it makes it less beguiling, if you like. But what the difference between these two leaders are, and I want to know what you think, Ruth, because you actually know them in a way I do not, is it seems to me that with Badenoch, she's good at doing a sort of here I am presentation, but as soon as she has contact with the outside world, be that contact with MPs, contact with journalists, I don't know about activists, but contact with advisors, etc. I mean, she's really brittle. She's really argumentative, and this is kind of lots of stories about this behaviour in government where she was falling out with everyone all the time. And my personal experience, she's really she's really abrasive. And it's this thing like the kind of she has a presentation on stage that just kind of falls apart when she hits contact with the real world, whereas Jenrick, less good on stage, but actually when you watch him in an interview on media or you watch him doing his social media videos, he's very fluent and he's much better on human contact. I mean, Ruth, that's my sort of impression of the both.
So, I mean, she's not been the sort of senior minister that's gone up and done things in Scotland or has reached out to other colleagues, which, that doesn't necessarily put you on the back foot. But I think what was quite telling is that this was very, very, she's got, I think, quite an England-centric view of how future elections are going to won and where she needs to survive and where the dangers come from, because the next big electoral test for her is the Scottish and Welsh elections in May and some English council elections. But the big policy announcement was for stamp duty, which doesn't exist in Scotland and Wales, because it's land and buildings transaction tax in Scotland and land transactions tax in Wales. So it doesn't even count there. She didn't, apart from at the very beginning, where she went through all of her cabinet and she mentioned the name of the Scottish leader and she mentioned the name of the Welsh leader. She didn't actually talk about any of their achievements. She didn't do a flick to them. She didn't give them anything that they could put out in their own sort of national press in Scotland and in Wales, which is something Cameron would do every year, never mind an election year.
Well, I think she's written off she's pricing in absolutely colossal defeat in the May council elections next year, and with her speech she's looking ahead and banking on the Labour government not succeeding on the economy. And I think that's the strategy which is going to decide whether she succeeds or fails. But my big question going into the conference was, are we going to know after this conference what her position is in relation to reform? And coming out of the conference, we do.
But I guess I just wonder, like, I am still, as I said, the fundamentals for me haven't really changed in terms of I still think it's up in the air whether she will be deposed or not after the May elections, whether the party will absolutely panic and think it's time for the seventh leader in, 10 years or something.
She's kind of failed early on, hit the bottom, and I think that she's... So yeah, I think
failure front loading.
She's front loaded that and lowered the expectations. Okay. There's zero expectations there's going to be anything other than an absolute catastrophe for the Tories in May. She'll write it off as not as important as the general election. Well, people do splinter into different parties when it's council elections. We were expecting this after our thumping defeat in the general election in 2024. So she's kind of writing that off in advance and setting out her pitch for beyond that, which is we are not going to follow reform and we're going to expect Labour to fail on the economy, and we will then be the trusted Tory party on the economy.
Okay, yeah, so I actually think the response to the budget is going to be quite a big and important point. I think the budget is going to dominate this year's politics in a way that the party conferences won't. And I think that, there's been a little bit of a bump for Labour off the back of their conference, but that's kind of dissipating already. I think there'll probably be a bump in the polls this week for the Tories of a couple of points within the margin of error. But again, that'll go away. Like you, I actually don't think the fundamentals have changed. But I think the budget and whether she's able to capitalise on the budget is going to be a much bigger test than whether she can stand up and read out a speech well.
Well, this is a quote from something that someone sent me, this a senior Conservative, when I was asking around what did they think of the speech. This is what they said. I thought it was a good speech, well delivered, very unlikely to shift the polls. I just don't think Kemi knows how to sustain pressure in opposition or has a strategy. And I think you both disagree with the strategy thing. You think she's kind of alighted on a strategy now, but can she sustain the pressure? And I guess that's what you're both asking about with your budget chat as well, right? Can she sustain the pressure? Can she keep up the energy?
We've had a really good crack here at talking about the speech and then what the impact of that is going to be if there is a wider impact of it. But I'm really interested in you saying that like off the conference stage when you were interviewing her, it was like a different person, and that kind of ease and the, you know, the laughter and the lightness and warmth that we saw from the stage just wasn't there for you.
I was surprised in this interview because, for a start, at the beginning, I took a bit longer. They gave us 5 minutes. And I know this is all in the weeds, etc., but the leader of the opposition, who is 17 points in the polls, 10 percentage points behind Farage and behind the Prime Minister and the Labour Party, was offering me 5 minutes. I had nearly 8 minutes with the Prime Minister, and I had 10 to 12 minutes with Nigel Farage. So for a start, you can't do an interview in 5 minutes. You can do a bit of knockabout. You can't do an interview. So she's there at conference. She wants to announce all these policies. And the amount of time I'm given means I cannot discuss any policy because as soon as I ask her a policy question, I run out of time. So I was like, well, what can I ask her in that time? Leadership, will she step down after May? Because she'd actually left that question open herself in the run-up interviews to the conference. What did she think of reform? You know, and what does she think about the party and challenges to her? And quite honestly, from the beginning to the end of this interview, every single question I asked her, she had a go at me for asking the question, like, how dare I ask that question? What a stupid question. And I just, to be honest, found it utterly astonishing. I was like, my job is to come in and ask you questions you don't want me to ask you because they're normally the more pertinent questions. And your job as leader of the opposition or any senior politician is to be able to handle the questions.
She could have been thinking about all the former Tory supporters who have either voted for or are thinking about voting for reform, and that she had the opportunity to explain why reform was a bad idea and why the Tories were the right.
And actually, at one point, I said to her, I seem to be making you very cross. You seem very irritated with me. And I didn't feel very irritated. I was just like, I'm just asking you questions. Well, I asked her exactly the same question as I asked the Prime Minister the week before. Given that Reform are raging ahead of all of them in the polls, it seems reasonable that you have to ask them about Nigel Farage and how they see the battle against him. And this is, we actually cut them together so you can compare and contrast their responses. Do you admire Nigel Farage as a politician?
On what basis?
Do you admire him?
I don't understand your question.
Well, it's just an open question. What do you think of him?
Why aren't you asking if I admire Keir Starmer or Ed Davey?
Well, I asked Keir Starmer about whether he admired
Nigel
Farage.
Well, I know, and I think it's very interesting that a lot of the media in Westminster is very interested about asking about Nigel Farage. I'm not interested in Nigel Farage. I'm interested in the Conservative
Party. All the other parties are. They're not interested in you. Prime Minister, do you admire Nigel Farage as a politician?
I think he's a formidable politician, and of course, I think he's the opponent as we go into the next election. I don't think it's going to be Labour versus the Tories.
Do you admire
it's going
him
to be
in any way?
It's going to be Labour against Reform. Look, I mean, he's a formidable politician. I'm not going to suggest otherwise. But fundamentally, what I don't admire is what he stands for.
Good answer by Keir Starmer. Terrible answer by Kemi Badenoch. That was a textbook of how not to answer a question. And it's quite odd that somebody who's risen up through politics, who's been in various different cabinet positions, who's had a great deal of experience at the top of public life, can't answer basic questions on the media. I think it was really good to play that clip.
I mean, what did you think, Ruth?
I thought Starmer had the right line. He was stumbled over himself and was a bit long. I mean, he just it's a really simple one, isn't it? It's just like, I can accept that he's got certain political and communicative gifts, but I don't admire him because I don't agree with them. Full stop. Move on. Ask me about something I want to talk about, or move the conversation on yourself to something you want to talk about. But there is something here about the fact that whether you like it or not, media is the conduit to get into people's homes. People won't vote for you if they don't know what you stand for. Part of being a political leader is about persuasion. It's about getting people onto side. And I always, I think maybe it was because my background was as a news journalist for radio, and speech is quite important in that. I always thought that there was the opportunity to answer questions in a way that you try to be as open as you could, and that I always thought you got credit, even if people disagreed with you, you got credit if they knew that you believed what you were saying. So it's which is why I never really like the kind of Michael Gove, I'm going to be really smart and clever and turn words against you and be witty and things. It was more about, there's more almost a kind of honesty of what you think, and people will give you credit even if they disagree.
I think also you've really, because actually someone else said this to me that has worked as an advisor behind the scenes and trained a lot of politicians, a very senior Conservative, said exactly the same. They said the issue with Kemi Badenoch is she looks at the media and she doesn't see it as an opportunity to communicate. She sees it as a hostile environment in which she has to fight, and she feels defensive. And I watched the Laura Kuenssberg interview on the Sunday morning show. Now, when you're 17 points in the poll, this is a massive opportunity on primetime BBC to communicate. And again, I watched her be interviewed by Laura. Laura was asking very reasonable questions about policy, and she got very, very angry and very defensive. And I think it requires probably a mindset shift where you go into those things thinking, it's an opportunity to get my message out, not it's a gladiatorial ring where we're going to have a dust up. Because my job is to ask difficult questions, but it doesn't have to turn up. It doesn't have to turn into a dust up. It depends how you answer the questions, right? She could have pivoted away very quickly.
And she's smart enough to do it. I think, see, the thing that I have is that angry and impatient doesn't win you votes. You go into every interview going, right, what do I want out of this? Is there a line that I want to land? Is there something I want to show of myself? Like, what is a win for me into every interview?
There is an open invitation for Kemi Badenoch to come on this podcast and do a very long, more relaxed interview. And maybe she'll come and do that.
And show us that sense of humour. Show us the fun side. Show us the warmth. And because I that was the first time I'd seen it on the stage, and she was good. She was funny. She landed a line. The jokes were sharp. Like, she laughed at them. She seemed relaxed. I saw more of her in that conference speech than I've seen in the last year.
We're being quite critical about some of her handling of various events and media appearances, but actually it's a hell of a job, isn't it, being leader of the opposition? You've basically got an open leadership contest against you in the form of Robert Jenrick day in, day out, and he's in your shadow team, and you can see that he really still wants the job, despite you having beaten him in a leadership race nearly a year ago, and she's under huge pressure. So, I mean, to come out and pull that off, she deserves credit for that, right? I think we have given her credit for that, haven't we? And I think leader of the opposition must be the toughest job in politics in terms of just the sheer work you have to do. I mean, the Prime Minister has a huge, intensely difficult job, but he also has a massive support network of advisors in the civil service and the logistics, whereas the leader of the opposition, you've got a shitload of work to do and a skeleton team, right? And you've got to be an absolute workhorse.
So keep your messages coming in. The number to WhatsApp is 07934 200 444, or you can always email us at electoraldysfunction@sky.uk.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.